One thing I saw in one of your interviews I was really kind of pleasantly surprised at, because oftentimes this gets a bad rap, but I think it was actually a great setup for your whole career. Was at one point, when you were 29, you said you were impatient that you wanted to be the CFO at before 30. And so I think that kind of set off the whole kind of trajectory for you for your whole career. And so obviously looking back on it now, you realized it was a little too impatient, but a lot of times that gets a bit of a bad rap. And so I was kind of wondering how you felt about it. And again, how can that become actually a positive driver as opposed to a negative?
I literally had a spreadsheet that had like, every career move I wanted, what level I wanted to get and at what age I wanted to get it at. And that's kind of how I, thought about my career early on. And of course, CFO was way earlier than it needed to be, but it did at least, I think, push me to I very early on in my career thought about, okay, what are all the elements of becoming a CFO? Like, what experiences do I need to have? I need to know capital markets. I need to know how investors think. I need to know how operations works. And so I, I, it pushed me to take roles that maybe I wouldn't have taken. I was comfortable in a lot of times the roles I was already in. And I think risk taking is part of it. You got to go out and do a few things that, take you out of your comfort zone and allow you to build some skill set that you wouldn't ordinarily, build in your, sitting comfortably in the existing role you have.
Again, you said, I think before, that it was never about money, it was all about your learning. And
Yeah.
so I was wondering, how do you kind of break that down especially as a younger professional, when you don't always know, what a lot of those jobs are going to entail?
Yeah. First thing, I totally subscribe to the idea is it's easy to fall into the trap of, taking the role that pays the most. And I wouldn't completely dismiss the notion that that is a decent decision, but I have always thought about, what is the best thing to do. And in terms of career building, and I think it's a pretty simple model. If I'm going to learn something in that next opportunity, it's probably worth doing, regardless of the outcome. You'll land on your feet. There's always another role out there after you finished learning at that existing role. So I would absolutely recommend, um, you know, looking for things that are outside of what your core capabilities are and going out there and doing that. You have to fail a few times to learn what works and what doesn't work, both from your career perspective and from what you're doing operationally and how you execute your day-to-day work. And so I think, I'd encourage everybody to constantly look for, particularly when you're younger in your career, look for opportunities, to try things that are different. I remember when I was an undergrad at Carnegie Mellon, there was this entrepreneurship class I took, and I still remember this guy saying, that he would have these students and they would go, I would love to be doing entrepreneurial stuff, but I just can't take the risk at this age in my career, which it's actually the wrong way. This is the best time. Most of you probably don't have children. Um, you don't have a lot of obligations. Yeah, you got to pay well, maybe you don't have to pay your student loans now that Biden took care of that, but you you have a perfect opportunity to go out and take a huge risk on something and and even stack up a few of those risk-taking opportunities. And eventually I think it'll lead you to the path, one, that you're successful at, two, that you enjoy, and three, that naturally gets you along the path of where your career aspirations lie.
Yeah, kind of going off of that, I actually feel the opposite of what those students told you. Like, I feel like I'm in the perfect spot to get a head start in my career journey. And I guess looking at the success you achieved at such a young age, do you have any advice for students who already know that they want to pursue like a certain executive position at a Fortune 500 company? Or is there anything that you did within your college experience that you think set you ahead in your career?
Somebody said one time, I think it was in business school, that there was some study and like there were 10 people in the class, I think it was at Yale, that had written down all their goals and the rest hadn't. And those 10 were way more successful than all the other students in the graduating class because they wrote their goals down. This was previous to Google, so you couldn't Google myths. Turns out this was a complete myth. It was actually made up. But having said that, I actually do believe writing down, what you want your end state to look like, and then thinking about the pathways to get there, and obviously taking advice from others, I think is a good way to kind of plot out your career. And I think it does start in college. What are the classes I need to take? What are the expertise? What expertise do I need, to ultimately really get to that C-level role? And then back to this, be willing to take risks and jump into areas that kind of help you progress down that path. The other thing I would say is, and this is important starting in college, but for sure in your professional career, is seek out a mentor whenever you can. Mentors are helpful in so many ways. One, also, to help you kind of navigate, and work out the rough edges of yourself in terms of your career, but also in terms of helping you navigate your career. And
speaking of the networks, the relationships, how either as a current student or as a young professional, do you build that kind of relationship, or is it just kind of happenstance that you worked with the CFO? How can you start to make that, I guess, more serendipitous for yourself
it's surprising to me how few people take advantage of alumni for network. Not, yeah, you reach out to the alumni, hey, can you get me a job at your company? I'm graduating next year, which, is a reasonable approach. I mean, it's not a dumb idea, but I think if I were a student now, knowing now what I know, I would reach out to people that are alumni of my school that are in very senior levels without any ask. I would definitely lean on alumni, but I think also professors can be particularly helpful. Many of them do research and are funded by corporations, and so they actually are very plugged in. In fact, a lot of times at Intel and in my past companies, it's the university professors that give us the the leads on who are students that we should be going after. So they're definitely plugged in and can be very helpful as well. But the key is to network, and I find that a lot of people are reluctant to reach out and have those just casual discussions with professors or what have you. And I'm telling you, they're almost universally open to the notion of it, and just not enough students take advantage of it.
So now kind of moving into like your role at Intel and your past career, like can you talk more about how it was adjusting to different company cultures as you switched between CFO roles? We know you mentioned in a different interview that in the first year CFO is kind of just listening and learning, like adjusting to the culture. Is that what you're currently experiencing at Intel, or how did you experience that culture switch between companies?
I think part of it is just trying to get an understanding of how decisions get made, what influences decisions, how finance plays a role in those decisions. And so part of the early, months of being here is really figuring out that part. Great thing is, I think universally, every time I've come to a company, there's a whole bunch of people that have been waiting for somebody to come listen to them about where they think the issues are, and they're not shy of it. They're not shy sharing those issues. So I think the first 6 months I spend most of my time doing that, to get acclimated.
So with your idea of this 6-month tour, like for young professionals, would you recommend that as they start their first jobs, they spend the first few months just listening and learning rather than being more forward and trying to show off their skills?
It's always good to do more learning than and a lot of listening versus shouting out your own ideas. And so I do think that there's a balance that you have to have as you come in as a young professional, and definitely learning as much. And again, I go back to this whole networking. If I were coming into a company, I would make it an attempt to get learnings in every area outside of my, whatever department I happen to be in, anytime I could, whether it's, some lunch and learn that's being offered at the company, or reaching out to a fellow, new college grad in another function and go, hey, I'd love to understand, what goes on in that area.